So we kick off the conversation with our first talking point, why terror money is harder to detect than most people think. Yes, terror financing rarely moves as one large transaction. Funds are often broken into small amounts to avoid triggering alerts, and criminals increasingly use proxies to fund businesses, charities, digital assets. So let's ask a policy analyst as well as a financial analyst, Vincent, as well as Faiz Mohammed. Let me start with you, Vincent. If criminal groups are using methods that look exactly like normal business activity, can banks now realistically be expected to spot every suspicious transaction?
Good morning and thanks for having me. So, we say banks are expected to, based on the Anti-Money Laundering Act, to spot suspicious transactions, and they're expected to report them once they note a transaction as suspicious. But you now have to look at the framework in which these criminal gangs are working. Because in the Nigerian sector, you don't know that the Nigerian economy is still largely informal, and there's still a lot of cash movement. If you follow what's happening with kidnapping and terrorism, you notice that there's still a lot of movement. And when there is cash movement, it will be difficult for the banks to note such and report such. So that's why we can say that the banks may not be able to do much when it comes to identifying spotting those funds for terrorism and reporting them. Another thing I will also say is that based on the law, it is for the banks to note such transactions and report them. But there's a limit to what the bank can do in ways to stop such transactions, in terms of discouraging such transactions and making sure that those that are involved are actually prosecuted. That has to do with the intelligence agencies and also the security, government security forces to do their work. So the banks, there's a limit to what they can do as part of reporting.
There's a limit that you say, but yes, they are able to. They're expected to be able to identify these suspicious transactions. But, you know, at what point does reasonable monitoring become almost impossible for them?
So, you know, based on the law, there are certain thresholds. For example, beyond the threshold, there are certain the bank is expected to do. Get the details of your clients, know and do all the information. So that's what the bank expects. Then, in terms of threshold, there's a minimum amount when that is being moved by an individual that is expected to report when it gets above that amount. And with an entity, there's also a threshold that the bank is expected to report. And when the identity of the person making some transfer is not known, the bank is expected to report to as unknown transfer. With those reports, you have the NFIU, and for those that are also regulated, you have to report to the regulator. So there are frameworks for those. But like I mentioned, there's a limit to what they can do. They can report, but it is for those agencies and also the network, EFCC, ICPC, and also the police unit, to go further and analyze those reports and follow up on those reports to make sure that individuals that are involved are prosecuted. And to a large extent, I think that is where there is a lot of weakness in terms of what is happening in the financial system. Because beyond the banking system, the security networks are also able to have their own framework, where they also track some level of cash transactions, investigate people. Like when you look at it, I also give a good analysis. Looking at the political system, look at Nigeria's political system. The anti-money laundering front is not only for terrorist gangs, it also looks at political exposed persons. In Nigeria's political system today, you see to what extent do we know the funds that our political office holders are entitled to. There is still a lot of secrecy in terms of what they are entitled to. And we also now give space to, when you see their lifestyle and their profile, to what extent can you say the money that is being spent is not linked to the funds for public functions, And what is the security agencies doing about those kind of lifestyle political office holders and to put them in check? So if we are not able to put those ones in check, how are we able to put terrorists that you don't see that they are actually succeeding? Are you able to monitor their activities to make sure that you track them and also block those moving money, whether it is through the formal system or the informal system? So for me, those are some of the issues we need to look at to be able to stop financing of terrorism, whether through the formal system or the informal system.
Very much, Mr. Vincent. Now, I'd like to go to Faiz Mohammed. Vincent just mentioned how the bank, the financial institution, are limited in this regard. Now, in your assessment, how effective are current anti-money laundering system at dictating patterns built around hundreds of small transactions rather than one large transfer?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. I think the reality of Nigeria's system is such that even in the global context, a lot of financial management systems tend to look at behavioral aspects. In practice, in Nigeria, that's not really the case. We still look heavily more on transaction values and reporting thresholds. And I think criminals understand this. So rather than moving large amounts at once, they often structure their transactions into smaller amounts that appear ordinary. So a series of transfers below reporting thresholds may present as a far greater risk than a single high-value transaction. So I think the critical question is not how much money is moved, but whether the transaction aligns with expected customer behavior. For example, an account belonging to a salary earner receiving multiple transfers from different states, immediately moving funds to newly opened accounts may warrant closer examination, even if individual transactions are relatively small. So I think, unfortunately, the different institutions that have to overlook all of these data, whether that's the NFIU, that's the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, or the DSS or the police, they all look at different data that is not necessarily in the same silo. So it's very fragmented data, fragmented information systems, particularly when you look at the size of the informal economy, for example. So I think although there's been significant progress made in deploying the sort of analytics and tools that would make the picture clearer, there's still a long way to go to sort of consolidate all of this information into one place and make it easier for financial institutions and the authorities to see these sort of transactions.
Let me come to you or stay with you, Faiz, there. Talking about behavioral patterns, and I'm sure, and I like the way that you brought in the global perspective into it. I know that many countries in other climes, maybe, because we watch movies, we see these things, they find it easier to follow the money, to make a trail. But it does look like it's a bit difficult for our banks in Nigeria. Mr. Vincent did say, yes, they should be able to detect, but then there is a limit because all other agencies have to come also and, do their own duties. Is there a pattern, by which these terrorists now make use of, or, is there a pattern they use to make illicit funds appear legitimate in Nigeria? I know it's a peculiar terrain, but from your investigations, from your analysis, or from your research, is there a particular pattern that we have in Nigeria here that they use, use these illicit funds, or, make it look legitimate so that we're not looking at?
Yes, actually, there are several methodologies that they use. So one common method involves the use of what is known as money mules. That is, individuals who allow their bank accounts or their mobile wallets to receive and transfer funds on behalf of criminal organizations. So criminals can also use shell businesses, particularly in cash-intensive sectors such as transportation or informal markets. Another strategy that they use is layering transactions across multiple accounts so as to obscure the origin of the funds. Mobile money platforms, fintech wallets, bill exchange operators, these systems can be exploited because oversight on them is weaker. Criminal groups also, they tend to leverage their family members and trusted associates and community networks, especially in the informal sector, that for the most part avoid a lot of external scrutiny. It's also important to note that increasingly you see virtual assets such as cryptocurrency and cross-border digital payments also presenting additional risks. I think it's important to recognize that these structures often mirror legitimate financial behavior. So a transport company receiving cash payments or a trader making multiple transfers across states, when you look at that from the bank's perspective, all of those might appear as legitimate transactions. And that's why effective counter-terrorist financing measures depend on context, they depend on behavioral analysis, and a lot of intersharing between agencies, rather than simple assumptions based on business type or transaction type or pattern recognition. While these things may help, there really needs to be a much more concise analysis of all the data presented to be able to determine whether or not a transaction is legitimate or not.
You know, we've been able to establish the fact that not just the banks, but these agencies also have to work in collaboration and do their own part to be able to, you know, make this detection much more easy and get to that point. But let's talk about a second talking point here now, which is technology. The technology to detect all of this, does it even exist? That's the one question. So is the problem, is the real problem data sharing? Because I really do not know how these banks work with themselves and with all these anti-money laundering agencies as well. So the biggest challenge may not be detection, but it could be coordination. Banks often see only a portion of a customer's financial activity, and you know, a suspicious pattern may become obvious only when data from multiple banks is combined. So it might not even just be one bank, multiple banks. So let me come to you, Mr. Vincent. If 10 banks each see one piece of the puzzle, who is responsible for putting the entire picture together in this case?
Since the NLU is
we seem to be having issues hearing Mr. Oshoma now. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, with the current system, the NFIU is also for collating because the banks, all the financial institutions are expected to submit those data to NFIU. And though they have their internal system whereby they are also some level of analysis and also to report suspicious transactions. Well, like you mentioned, when the transaction control institution, the NFIU that receives this data will be able to see and analyze this data. And like you also mentioned, it is one thing to report the data. It's also look at analyzing the data and also looking at patterns, bring out patterns from those data, which will now lead to further investigation. And I think for largely, that is the area that is quite missing. Being able to analyze this data, when you look at the formal data, the one that is collected from the bank. But I also think very much that the fact that we still have a large movement outside the banking system, and also with the coming in of the fintechs and the POS, where you require less information to be able to transact on those platforms, because the profiling in those to encourage inclusion, they have reduced the level of platform. So they also present a platform for movement of illicit cash, illicit money. So I think outside the major banks, and we also look at those systems and also the cash movement, our frameworks whereby we intelligence in respect to cash movement, even in the rural areas. I think those are the major areas that is quite lacking. Because if you look at the Nigerian economy, it's still largely informal. There's still a lot of cash movement. If you look at the volume of outside the deposit money bank, is far more than what we already have, what we have in the system. That's why the last attempt we designed the Naira, which was suspended, it was targeted. We need to be able to bring those funds into the mainstream or look for ways to track those funds. It's part of ways we can be able to reduce terrorism financing until we are able to put a framework to track cash transactions, also get intelligence and analyze those intelligence properly. We can not only depend on the mainstream of the financial system to be able to misuse terrorism financing.
It takes a lot, really, and it's not just about one bank. I know there could be a lot of competition here as well, but we'll talk more about that. But just before I let Rhoda come in, a technical expert is also on the line, David Osawaru, Product Manager, Ledage Technologies. He'll be joining in on the conversation as well as we go on.
Okay, let me go to FICE again. Now, if each bank only sees a fragment of a customer's activity, can we fairly judge banks on their ability to identify broader criminal patterns?
I think banks should be evaluated based on what they can reasonably observe and control, not on information they do not possess. So a bank can't be expected to identify a nationwide financing network if critical transactions occur across multiple institutions and across channels beyond its own visibility. But you can, and the bank should be expected to identify unusual patterns within its own ecosystem. Regulators like the NFIU increasingly assess whether banks maintain effective risk management frameworks rather than whether or not they can successfully identify every criminal actor. So questions such as, does the banking institution conduct appropriate customer due diligence, updated customer profiles, they call it KYC, know your customer. Do they investigate unusual behavior? Do they file reports promptly? Because these accountability measures can help process quality, governance, and responsiveness. So if a bank ignores repeated warning signs or fails to investigate high-risk customers or neglects these obligations altogether, then it should face consequences for that. At the same time, regulators have to also recognize the limitations created by a very fragmented data environment. So if you excessively penalize, misdetections, that will encourage banks to be defensive in their practices. Maybe that might encourage them to, go ahead with unnecessary account closures or excessive restrictions on their customers. I think the ultimate goal should not be to punish a financial institution for lacking the oversight, but it's to ensure that they maintain strong systems capable of identifying and escalating the risks that they can reasonably detect.
I mean, that's the essence of it, maintaining a strong system, building strong systems that could detect this funds, these illicit movements wherever they are. And of course, banks working hand in hand with the anti-money laundering agencies. All right, let's quickly go to the last talking point, which is about what would seamless tracking actually look like. And that's where we're bringing in tech expert David Osawaru here to help us, also look at it from this area by way of solution. There are AI-driven transaction monitoring that, would identify patterns, rather than just the large transactions. We've had the stronger BVN, mean accounts linkage and verification and all of those things. We have them in place. So, David, let me bring you in here. Experts have been able to analyze what banks should do and not do, how banks should work with the anti-money laundering agencies, as well as what these agencies should also be doing to ensure that they keep monitoring these activities with the information that they have. So, from you now, David, you are the tech person. What would a truly seamless financial surveillance system look like in reality, in practicality, not just by fiction? Do we have David there? Hello, David, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, so when you're dealing with this structure, you're dealing with fintechs, right? And you're looking at the
have issues.
Okay.
They are baked into your processes. They are baked into your operations, baked into the products that you build, right? And so there are a lot of policies from the CBN. We've seen reports, we've seen different things published from different people. But like some of the other speakers have said, right, these transactions still manage to slip through. You see smaller volume, you see smaller transactions, right? And they are always disguised as things that look legitimate, right? So what would seamless tracking look like? Let me give you a very practical example. We have a lot of issues here in the Nigerian system. If you're in Lagos, Nigeria now, you can go to that village and you would see people basically hawking SIM cards, registered SIM cards, right? And someone IN has been linked to that SIM card, right? These are some of the issues we have. What happens with these details are readily available in the market? We've heard of things like, oh, people's data are being sold on the black market. A lot of bank accounts are also open that information. So who are you tracking? Are you tracking the actual text, right? Or you're tracking somebody whose details have been used for those transactions, right? Just yesterday, we saw the Katsina state government say, oh, we're banning the sale in jerry cans in these particular local governments. We're banning the use of POS in these local governments. Why? These things are things that have been seen to help with terror funding, right? So I'm just trying to create a scenario for you where you see that there are different factors, right? And there are different channels that these guys are using in the formal banking sector, in tech sectors, that makes it very hard to trace these funds and very hard to who is actually moving this money. But like I started, when you're dealing with technology, you have to bake it in. So with fintechs, because I work with a lot of fintechs, what we usually do is this. We have policies, we have frameworks put in place. Oh, transactions above this particular amount, you have to provide things funds. But we've usually seen that a lot of people become complacent, right, in a chase for higher volumes, in a chase to gather customers, in a chase to, oh, let us get a large market share. They relax some of these rules and policies made by the CBN. Because if you ask any fintech right now, right, especially those that are licensed, if you ask Moneypoint, if you ask OP, if you ask Palm, right, they all have these anti-money laundering mechanisms in place, right? They have the KYC in place, right? They have transaction screenings in place. They screen bank accounts, they can easily detect these things. But we are beginning to see a very, very lax compliance from a lot of organizations and a lot of companies. So seamless tracking will look like this. The policies are in place, first of all, need enforced, right, by these institutions, right? And one of the speakers mentioned something earlier, right? When you clamp down too hard on these guys, what happens? People begin to hide the issues, right? They are no longer free to talk about them, to report these issues. Why? Because they fear being penalized, right? But the fintechs, the banking industry, first has to realize something. The funds flow in, right? The CBN has been making policies to ensure that, massive cash isn't in circulation. So this cash is coming into the banking sector in different means. And if the banking sector first does not enforce these rules and regulations, then we have a problem. That is where it starts from.
David, it does look like the banking system have got a lot of work to do here based on your assessment, based on practicality and those you have worked with, especially the fintech. Very quickly, let me come to you, Vincent. You've heard David. In practicality, the way he's worked with the fintech organizations. Vincent, do you think that the banks in Nigeria, that the fintech organizations, do you think they are strong enough as of today to handle this issue when following the money?
If you look at the current system, like as we mentioned, in terms of monitoring not the transaction, looking at the behavioral pattern, I think there's much to be desired. There's much to be desired for the bank system, financial system. And I think with the adoption of technology such as AI tools, they should be able to track those transactions, looking at those patterns. Because to a great extent, the criminal elements, they are always looking at ways to be ahead of the system. So I think those involved should be looking to think ahead and try to go into the minds. You see, in the developed countries, you see sometimes they try to engage some persons in criminal gangs to try to enter into the head of those members' element, think through them. So I think such consultation is important. Those are some of the ways. That's why what I've said earlier on is that if you want to look at the system, as much as there's much to be desired from the banking system, it has to be a combination. Because even if you are able to take care of the needs in the banking system, if you don't look at other factors, you definitely will still have those issues, cash moving in easily. Like David mentioned about the SIM card, those are some of the things that helps, because currently you know that with BVN and also with the SIM cards have to be registered. Even like the fintechs, just with your phone number, you can easily open an account and move money. So you have to look at that's why they are trying to tighten that those SIM cards. But when people are now registering cards, they are trying to break the system and also exploit the system. So all hands will make sure that as we tighten in the banking system, the other partners came to ensure that we make it very difficult for those criminal gangs and elites to go through our financial system and be able to sponsor their activities.
Life is being made easy with the use of AI. He did mention AI, Mr. Vincent. And as much as we have a lot of backlash against AI, AI has come to stay. One CEO did say we have to deal with it, really, and truly we have to deal with it. AI has made life easier, in as much as he has his own risks as well, but of course a lot of advantages with it. Now, David, can AI really help us drive monitoring and reduce financial crimes in Nigeria today? Are we even ready to employ AI to do all of these things for us?
Yes, we are. Right? So when people talk about AI, they tend to look at the very, very big things. Oh, we want AI to do this, we want AI to do that. But AI is just a tool, first of all. And it depends on how best you want to integrate it with the current activities. Let me give you an example. AI can help in recognizing certain patterns, right? So you notice that, this particular bank account keeps doing regular transactions at this particular time every day of this amount. And AI can help in flagging those kind of issues, right? AI can help in saying, we notice that this particular person's details look suspicious. We know this particular address has been used multiple times to create different bank accounts, about 15, 20 different bank accounts, right? We notice that this keep popping up. Those are some of the advantages of AI, right? So we're looking at a situation where AI has to be baked into the current existing financial operations, right? And we could also use these AI tools in better helping connect our different platforms. For example, the banks who have the user details, the banks are the ones who have the customer details. They are the ones who have the transactions. They see those flows come in and flow out. But the banks are not solely responsible for them. So the security agencies need to also see this information. The regulatory bodies also need to see information. AI can help in this as well. AI can help in connecting the dots and helping build a better form where this information can be shared better. Right? Nigeria is not as far behind in AI as many people think. Right? We already have AI baked into a couple of products being used here in Nigeria. Right? And what we need to do is this. How best can we use it in this particular financial operation? And then I believe that you're going to see a lot of things improve. For example, most times what we have right now is manual teams have to review certain transactions, right? If something is flagged by a bank system, right, someone has to come in, look at the details, and then approve, right, or pass it on to the next relevant office. But many of those things create redundant tasks. Many of those things spend time, right? And then for someone who is wise, because one of the speakers also mentioned that, oh, these guys are consistently improving. For people who notice that, the bank is delaying, or let's say they even have an insider in the bank who tells them, oh, these are the review processes happening, right? These are the review processes happening. Easily know that, oh, this and this is going on, right? Automatically flags these things. What happens when it is AI that automatically detects these transactions going through, right? And AI automatically flags it up, blocks the account, blocks the proceedings, and it's immediately raised to the highest level of authority based on the data and based on the information gathered. Because AI can simply be trained. It can be told that if you notice this, if you notice this pattern, if you notice this transaction volume, if you notice this, based on the previous things that have happened in the past, these are the actions you should immediately take. And so when AI is baked into these operations, what happens? You get faster response times, right? You have you bypass a lot of the middlemen, a lot of the eyes that could see these transactions and blow the whistle, right? Enabling these criminals, enabling these terrorists, right, to have prior warning, right, and start acting accordingly. What happens when an AI system flags up a transaction going on, flags up suspicious details in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes, right? The relevant authorities have been notified, right? And then these same AI tools are also integrated with the security agencies, right, to help fast track a lot of things like the tracking of these individuals, pinpointing them, right? So when we talk about using AI, we're not just talking about the banks now. We're talking about the telcos integrating the AI to be able to detect, oh, this particular region, this particular NIN, this particular cell tower, whatever it is having this amount of calls, messages, requests at this time. Oh, these are the suspicious things happening, right, with this phone number. These are the suspicious calls, right? We notice this name is popping up 50 times. This name was used to register a SIM card in Asaba. It's now being used to register a SIM card in Benin. It's used to register a SIM card in Kanu. Used to register a SIM card in Bonu, right? AI can help the telcos in tracking all of these things. And when you properly integrate it in all these sectors, then you have a robust framework where AI can improve your operations, right? And also help ensure that you track these things on time and you can get on them as fast as possible without alerting the terrorist one, right? And also ensuring that you do things properly. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
I honestly, I just hope that these terrorists are not smarter in any way, honestly, based on what you have said. Because we know we talked about it. We need to have further investment when it comes to cybersecurity in the banking system, in the agencies, in the telcos, and all of those, so that we keep. You kept using the word baking. We have to keep baking such that, because we have the BVN, we have the NIN accounts, and all of those integration. What are we waiting for? Faiz, maybe you want to talk about this. you know, we already have the BVN and we have the NIN. Is there a way, or is a stronger BVN NIN account integration, is it enough, or do we need to further bake this BVN NIN thing and
Using the AI tools.
using the AI tools, and you know, getting the people also involved in all of those things? Faiz, let's get your own take on that.
So I think integrating bank accounts with BVN and NIN systems is definitely a major step forward, but it's not a complete solution. Identity verification is only as strong as the underlying data and the process used to maintain it. So criminals can still exploit weaknesses through identity theft, maybe food enrollment, account sharing, or the use of proxies. I think that has gotten better over time because of the ways in which the identity systems have become a little bit better integrated over time. But we also face challenges related to, you know, incomplete enrollment. There's a very large percentage of the population that is not properly integrated into NIMC or, you know, the banking system. We have inconsistent records, and we have a very large informal economy that is proving increasingly difficult to integrate into, you know, formal networks and such as these. So individuals operating outside these formal systems may still have limited digital footprints, and that makes risk assessment a little more difficult. I think another challenge is that identity verification confirms who someone claims to be, but it doesn't necessarily reveal their intentions or their connections to criminal networks. So an effective financial crime prevention requires moving beyond just a static identity check and having a dynamic risk assessment. That means combining identity verification with behavioral analysis, with device intelligence, with geolocation patterns, with network analysis, with transaction monitoring, all at once. And I think that is where the challenge is. All of these systems are not properly integrated into one particular silo that can be properly analyzed. So I think BVN, NIN account integration creates a very strong foundation for the kind of accountability and traceability that we want. But the future lies in developing a comprehensive digital identity ecosystem that enables secure verification while still protecting privacy and supporting legitimate access to these sorts of financial services.
Continuous improvement, continuous reforms will take us a long way, and you know, we'll eventually be able to follow the money. You know, today we're exploring the hidden battle behind Nigeria's security challenges, not just the forest, the highways or borders, but the financial system itself. Because every kidnapping, every terror attack, every criminal enterprise ultimately depends on just one thing: money. And if money stops moving, well, will the crime stop too? So that's why the financial system, even we talked about the agencies, NFIU, they all have their works cut out for them. I must say thank you so much. We'll end with that Faiz conclusion on that. Thank you so much, Vincent Oshoma, Faiz Mohammed, as well as David Osawaru, helping us to break down all of those things and where we could go ahead to, you know, track the money, the illicit funds. And yeah, maybe at the end of the day, Nigeria would eventually be able to nip these issues in the bud. Thank you so much for joining us on the Front Burner.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, that's the Front Burner. Of course, the conversation continues because, yes, a lot of our people, a lot of our children, our teachers, our wives, our husbands, our uncles are in captivity of the terrorists. And we just have to look at all the areas where these terrorists have been able to, finance their movements and such that, seek solution to those areas. That's why we're having this conversation on TMS on LN 24/7. Right after now, we'll bring you news update at the top of the hour, and then we'll come back for more conversation. Do stay with us.
Stay up to date with LN 24/7. LN 24/7. With news, politics, business, sports, and more on LN 24/7. Where the story goes, we go.
On news now, a Federal Capital Territory High Court in Akpo, Abuja, has dismissed an application by former Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Sadiya Umar Farouk, to set aside